It's looking like J.J. McCarthy might just be a Minnesota Viking. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Vikings Now by Chat Sports. My name is Patrick Siepman, and coming up on today's show, we got some developing rumors around the Vikings trading up and landing the Michigan quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. But before we dive into all the quotes from Matt Miller of ESPN, also Jordan Reed, and then we also got a really interesting quote from Field Yates I want to share with you guys. I got one question for you. Would you trade up for J.J. McCarthy? Give me a Y for yes or an N for no down in the comments section. I'll make this pinned comment on today's video, so it's right down there. Really curious to see where the fan base is at around McCarthy because he's a polarizing prospect. And I feel like people got a ton of different opinions, so let me know your thoughts before we dive into it if you would trade up for the Michigan quarterback. But let's dive into what Matt Miller said, because he said talks are pretty much ongoing between the Minnesota Vikings, Arizona Cardinals, and Los Angeles Chargers. This is what Matt Miller had to say following J.J. McCarthy's pro day in Ann Arbor. He said the Vikings sent neither Kwesi Adofo-Mensah nor coach Kevin O'Connell to the Michigan Pro Day Friday. However, quarterbacks coach Josh McCown was firmly planted right behind McCarthy during his 25-minute throwing session. In talking to NFL personnel while on the road at Pro Days this week, the feeling is that the Vikings will be aggressive in trading up to number 4 or number 5 spot to land the Michigan quarterback. One general manager I talked to this week said McCarthy is a top 6 pick right now. The question is will the Minnesota Vikings trade up to get him? And kind of my initial thoughts coming out of the, obviously following JJ's pro day was that I really do believe that, the Vikings are, I'm not saying they're giving up on the Drake May, Jaden Daniels kind of hype, getting up there to the 2 pick or the 3 pick. But, I'm really starting to think that the Commanders and Patriots are just going to sit there and take their guy. So that leaves the Vikings. Are you going to trade up to 4 or are you going to trade up to 5? And my take around this is you have to move up to 4, because let's just say hypothetically we get that notification on our phones that the Vikings trade up to the 5th pick with the Los Angeles Chargers and they just have to give up number 11 and number 23. We would all be sitting there on draft night crossing our fingers that a team doesn't jump the Minnesota Vikings like the New York Giants, who have been interested in McCarthy, and they're already picking at, spot number 6. They could send Arizona an offer of 6 and maybe some extra late round draft capital to move up and jump Minnesota, and then they would go and get their guy. I just think, with where the Vikings are right now and with all the moves they have made leading up to this, it wouldn't necessarily make a lot of sense, in my opinion, to trade up to 5. I think the Vikings need to be all in on getting that 4th pick in this year's draft, because you wouldn't want to risk somebody jumping you, and then McCarthy goes 4, and you're sitting there at 5, and you're saying, well, what do we do now? Do we take a guy like Marvin Harrison or Brock Bowers or whatever it may be? I just think the Vikings would really be in a tough situation. But, either way, with these reports that have been coming out, I do think the Vikings will land the 4th or the 5th pick in this year's upcoming draft. I'm just really hoping that they land the 4th pick, because if you land number 5, you're really setting yourself up to, get somebody, the ability to jump you and take your quarterback. But I did want to get to this from Field Yates, who had kind of a rumors roundup article we put out earlier this morning. He said, people around the league with whom I've spoken believe Minnesota basically sent up a flare to any team at the top of the order considering a trade down. That it is interested in talking. Whether that manifests a deal is to be determined, but a team willing to move back is not only a possible partner, but also the certainty of where 2 first-round picks are in order. The Cardinals, number 4, and Chargers, number 5, are the 2 often linked targets right now. And again, I totally agree with this, because I think the Commanders are in a spot where they've set themselves up where they're going to either take Daniels or May, and I think New England is just sitting there at 3 and saying, we're going to take whatever the other guy is that is on the board. And I think it would take the Vikings to send a Godfather type of offer to New England where, let's just say New England likes Daniels or they like Drake May, but they aren't fully in love with either of those 2 prospects. I could see New England just kind of sitting there and being like, we'll require 3 first-round picks and then maybe even more draft capital, like a couple extra thirds for you guys to move up. And I don't know if the Vikings are willing to kind of sell the farm on a guy like Drake May when they could possibly only package 11, 23, and move up the 4. Again, I think maybe you would need to add, a third-round pick next season, or maybe an extra third this year, or an extra fourth this year, considering the Vikings do have 2 of them to move up the number 4. But, man, it's just, the Vikings are – I don't want to say they're playing with fire right now with the way they've been doing this whole kind of trade negotiations, but I think the Vikings, you are going to really have to be certain, if you trade up to 5, that Arizona is taking Marvin Harrison at 4 and the first 3 picks are quarterbacks. You have to be certain, because if draft night rolls around and McCarthy goes 4 and you're sitting there at 5, you're not freaking taking Michael Penix or Bo Nix top 5 in the draft. I do want to talk about the pro day yesterday for McCarthy, and I don't put too much stock in the pro day. I just like, mainly what I'm looking at is just overall body language, just kind of how the ball comes out of JJ McCarthy's hand. And I think this is just more ammunition to what we've already known around McCarthy, because I've said on this channel, I've got him as my 3rd ranked quarterback in this class, behind Caleb Williams obviously, and then Drake May at 2. But I'll tell you what, JJ is really closing that gap between Drake May. I think Drake May's got more potential than McCarthy, because I think he has that Justin Herbert, Josh Allen type of potential, but I also think he has the floor of a guy like Carson Wentz, where Carson Wentz has all the talent in the world, but his pocket presence wasn't always the best. He turned the football over, a little too much. And I think, if the Vikings were going to go get Drake May, I think he would work out in Minnesota, no doubt about it. But I think the Vikings just have to consider these 2 options of, like, are you going all in on Drake May and kind of selling the farm, or are you still going to, sell a little bit of the farm, but get a guy who you may not think is, that far behind Drake May in J.J. McCarthy. But I didn't really want to put too much stock into his pro day. I just think it was kind of confirming thoughts that I already had around the Michigan quarterback. And, I'm starting to get fired up that he could possibly, be here in Minnesota. And, overall, I just think either way the Vikings do end up going on this, I do think it is going to work out. But before we dive into one quote from Jordan Reed of ESPN, I do want to tell you guys about Prize Picks. If you guys head to prizepicks.com/CLNS, that link is for you guys in the comments and description. And if you plug in promo code CLNS, we'll give you guys a first deposit match up to $100. Put 20, 50, 75 bucks into your account. You'll get a free 20, 50, or 75 bucks right back. And there's no better time to be playing Prize Picks right now. March Madness is going on. Right after I record this video, I'm going to go watch more games, make more lineups with Prize Picks, and I suggest you guys do the same. It adds so much more juice, just adds so much more entertainment value, because even if a game's a blowout here in March, you still have something to look forward to, which is the part I like the most. So make sure you guys click that link, download the app, and use code CLNS, and we'll give you guys a first deposit match up to $100. So Jordan Reed of ESPN wrote up another article about the Vikings trading up in this year's draft, and this is what he had to say. He said, sending an offer to the Patriots for the number 3 pick should certainly be the first plan of attack for Minnesota Vikings GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, which I agree. Then he carried on to say, which would allow the Vikings to have a chance at LSU's Jaden Daniels, North Carolina's Drake May, or Michigan's J.J. McCarthy. But if the team can't pull that off, then the Chargers pick at number 5 feels like an obvious fit to make a swap. But the real beauty of that deal the Vikings made for number 23 is that now they have options. Even if they can't secure a trade up the board, they suddenly have 2 first-rounders, bettering their chance to get quarterbacks outside of the top options. Washington's Michael Penix or Oregon's Bo Nix could be an answer at number 23, and potentially later if Minnesota wants to trade back from that spot. So I do want to talk about the Bo Nix, Michael Penix argument right now, and I would just be out on him. I think I wouldn't call it a disaster, because I think the Vikings are going to be able to develop a quarterback, no matter who it is, to a certain level. But I think if you would get a guy like Penix or a guy like Bo Nix, who has already, pretty much played 6-7 years of college football here, I think he's already closer to his potential than, people think. And I don't really think he has that much more room for growth in comparison to a guy like McCarthy, who just turned 21 2 or 3 months ago. And if you would put McCarthy around this Viking support system, like we've talked about countless times here on the channel, they will get the most out of whatever quarterback they do bring in. And, kicking it back to the J.J. McCarthy part of it, because I do think the Vikings, if I had to put money on it right now, they are going to draft J.J. McCarthy, and he will be a Minnesota Viking. But when they do make that selection, I fully expect it to happen. I think it's going to be the Vikings trading up to number 4, sending, some type of offer of 11-23 and, maybe an extra 3rd or 4th round pick. JJ, no matter what, should sit behind Sam Darnold for the entire season. And even if Sam Darnold goes out there and the Vikings are 2-5 and, it's just a bad start to the season and he looks terrible, I still think you should sit JJ an entire year because you look at what, I hate giving love to the Green Bay Packers on here on the channel, but, they were patient with Aaron Rodgers, patient with Jordan Love, and it ends up paying off because I think with these guys, like if you just, throw them into the mayhem and you throw them into the chaos of an NFL season and just, I think it can kill confidence, especially for a young player like McCarthy. I would rather have him sit behind Darnold, add some more weight onto that frame, and then if you're sitting there next year, the kid's going to be 22 years old, turning 23 in January with a full season sitting behind obviously Sam Darnold's only 26, turning 27 in June. I don't want to call him a veteran, but he's been around the league for a while. He's been in different systems. He's been in San Francisco and around that tutelage of Kyle Shanahan and Lynch, the GM. So I just think it would be the right call. I think it would bother some people if JJ would come to Minnesota and sit behind Sam Darnold, but I think it would be the right choice long term. But kind of to conclude my thoughts here, rumors are definitely developing, and I think we're very close to the Vikings not trading up with the Washington Commanders or New England Patriots, but the Arizona Cardinals. And I think that is the likely option here for the Vikings. And, if I had to call it right now, J.J. McCarthy will be playing in Minnesota next season, but he will be sitting behind Sam Darnold. And I don't want people to, panic and say, why aren't we playing him? Why aren't we playing him? Why would we take him in the top 5 if we're not going to play him? Just trust the process on this. There's a reason, all of these moves, Kwesi's made this offseason that are really going to help out a young quarterback here just develop over and over again. I mean, just the coaching staff Minnesota has built with Kevin O'Connell and Josh McCown on the offensive side of the football and Wes Phillips. I think it's really going to work out. And I'm starting to get fired up about McCarthy coming to Minnesota. But I'll ask you guys this one more time. Would you trade up for J.J. McCarthy before we get out of here? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Closing in on 24K. So if you guys want more around this football team and any more rumors around, J.J. McCarthy possibly being a Minnesota Viking, make sure you lock us in as your go-to Vikings YouTube channel. See y'all next time. Skol Vikes.